Hello and welcome back to the Down to the Wire podcast. We are back again. I was about to say updating you with the latest and greatest in sport, but actually this week is the latest and greatest from Formula 1 because we've got like a first race of the season Formula 1 special on our hands.
It was
Jack,
a very special race. It was a very special race.
It was a very special race. You okay?
But I am good. I mean, I'm just on a high.
How could we not be after that race?
A race. It was just incredible.
Brilliant, wasn't it?
Nothing else happened this weekend. Like, football-wise, it was like it's the international, so nobody cares. There's no other sports, really. Cycling's on a little bit of a dip at the moment. There's just a smaller set of competitions, nothing
Wales
big.
won the Six Nations, I guess.
Oh, yeah, they did. But that happened on the Friday, so... and it was almost anticlimactic. Because
It was a bit anticlimactic,
It wasn't a Super
wasn't it?
Saturday moment, was it?
No.
But, yeah, that race just well and truly fulfilled my weekend of sport. What a race.
Yeah, I mean, well, we're obviously going to take it apart piece by piece, but yeah, it had everything really, didn't it? It had battles at the front, battles in the middle, it had strategy, it had safety cars, it had...
And Mazepin went out early.
Racing. Mazepin living up to his new name. Yeah, it literally had everything that a Formula 1 fan could want, really. And it doesn't really get much better than that. And I'm quite glad as well, because it had been built up so much. Like, how disappointing would it have been if, like, Mercedes had just turned up and just driven off, like they have done in the past? Like, it would have been so anticlimactic. So, good stuff, good stuff. We'll just dive right in then, shall we?
Yeah, let's do that.
Dive straight in. So yeah, coming off the back of the end of last season, we had Bahrain, followed by Sakir, followed by Abu Dhabi. We're back in Bahrain for the start of the season this time around. Am I right in saying that Australia's further towards the end this year?
Yes, it is on the calendar, but it's not the first race.
Yeah, so I think I'm right in
you know
saying
what? It
that...
actually might be the penultimate or two from last, so it's probably
Possibly.
at the end.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Bahrain has been the season opener twice in the past, 2006, 2010. I think I'm right in saying that Fernando Alonso won those.
Yes, they were saying that on the commentary for qualifying.
Oh, did they? Oh, there we are then.
They were going on about how
There we are.
could he win it just because every other time they've had a Bahrain to start, he has won it. But it's like,
I
I
knew
don't think
that
an
it had
Alpine's
been-
really going to win it.
I knew that it had been the season opener on those times just because I had a quick read before the podcast, but I didn't know that Alonso had won both of them. Oh, there we are. As we'll find out later. Spoilers if you haven't seen the race. Fernando Alonso didn't win. Shock. But we'll go into that a little bit. Yeah, I like a race under the lights in Bahrain. But I mean, I guess we'll start at the front, shall we? What the majority of Formula 1 fans have been craving for a very long time. Hamilton versus Verstappen.
And at least a bit of competition.
Yes.
And that's the key bit, and had a competition for so long. But yeah, Hamilton against Verstappen. I mean, a lot of the commentary was going on about we didn't get to see Schumacher against Senna, and they are properly pumping this sort of rivalry between Hamilton and Verstappen as the next Schumacher against Senna-esque
I mean,
rivalry.
it's worth bearing in mind that I think it's with the media there is an element to which they will plug this sort of rivalry because the more interested people get in the rivalry, the more people will watch the Formula 1 coverage.
Yeah,
But it is very much kind of, as in, look, we know Verstappen is very, very, very talented, but since he's been with Red Bull, this is the first time that you look at the car and you go, yeah, that's a potentially title-winning car.
Well,
There's like lots
you'd
of...
probably say they are the best car this year. Would you say?
At this point in time, yeah, definitely. You've got Hamilton, kind of old guard, going for the record-breaking title. You know, he's been there and done it. So it is literally like a clash of contrasts, isn't it? Which is what makes it so fascinating, I guess. And you know, I've just been watching Drive to Survive to get myself in the mood. And Christian Horner said in the last 10 years of Formula 1 there have been two winners in the I think
that is
there's
true.
been
two winners for the constructors, three for the individuals.
Yeah, so there've been two constructors, and they have been Mercedes and Red Bull. So we've basically got clash of the titans, really, as things have been for the it's very, very interesting. Lots of kind of underlying stories as well. You've got Red Bull coming back with Sergio Perez, a more competitive number 2 driver. You've got Bottas coming back, who's potentially frustrated with how things have been going for him. There's a lot going on, which I'm sure we'll see throughout the course of the season. But I guess we'll just focus on this race for now, because there's a lot to be talking about. So, yeah, in terms of qualifying, Verstappen. I'm so used to saying Hamilton qualified on pole. Verstappen qualified on pole.
Confidently as well.
Yes,
about a 0.4 second gap.
Yeah,
it was very big.
Yeah, followed by Hamilton, followed by Bottas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they kind of went for different strategies, didn't they, in the race? They kind of, I guess Mercedes had to do things to kind of put themselves in a good position because they didn't quite have the outright pace to beat Red Bull. So whereas before they've been able to just pit whenever the heck they want and just know that their car's going to haul them back into a good position, they didn't have that luxury this time around. So they both started on mediums, didn't they?
Yep.
Hamilton pitted lap 13 for the hards. Verstappen pitted when did Verstappen pit? Lap 17, was it?
Yes, lap 17.
And he went from medium to straight to medium, didn't he?
Yes. He had that luxury. I think Hamilton had already used 2 sets of mediums during qualifying.
Okay.
So he didn't have that option for the second stint.
Okay, so basically then Hamilton's strategy was medium, hard, and Verstappen's strategy was medium, medium, hard. Mm-hmm. It was looking a little bit touch and go for Merck at one point, wasn't it? Because they seemed to, their first stint on the hard, they seemed to struggle, and the tyres seemed to fade out quite quickly. They then pitted again, and you were like, well, hang on, if they've pitted this early, they're going to have to do a 3-stopper. They're going to have to do, start on the medium, 2 sets of hard, and then the softs at the end to finish off.
Verstappen did more laps on his first set of mediums than Hamilton did. Say that again. Hamilton only did 13 laps on his mediums, which isn't very many, considering Verstappen then went to lap 17 on his. And then for his second stint, he went... Well, he actually did 22 laps on his second stint. So a lot more. But so Verstappen's getting 22 laps out of one set of mediums. Hamilton couldn't even get 13. So clearly there's a little bit of an underlying problem for Mercedes that they can't seem to maintain the tyre.
Well, I think there are a couple of factors. I think you've got to consider fuel as well, because obviously as the race goes on, the fuel level drops, which means you're putting less stress on the tyres. Mm-hmm. And I think that was shown by the second stint that Hamilton had in the Mercedes, whereby, he did a monument. I think it was like 27 laps or something like that, wasn't it?
For which stint, sorry? The final
stint?
For
his final stint, yeah.
I can't remember how many laps the race had, but he pitted on lap 28 for his final
I think
set.
The race was 56 laps in the end, something like that. So it was, anyway, regardless of the exact number, it was a huge, an absolutely massive stint, really. Considering the first stint on the hards had been really short.
Well, he'd done 10 laps more than Verstappen on the hards by the end of the race.
Yeah, there we are then. So, maybe a little bit, but as in I think basically what happened is that, and I'm getting this from what Toto Wolff said, I think basically they perhaps went a little bit too hard on the hards in that first stint. And I think they realised for the second stint they were going to have to ease off somewhat in order to make them last longer. Which is where the strategy came in, I think. I think that was the balancing point for Mercedes, was going fast enough that you keep yourself in, ahead of Verstappen when he was going to have to eventually pit again, but don't go so fast that by the time Verstappen has pitted, your tyres have worn off to the point where Verstappen can just drive past, which was very nearly the case, actually. Moving on to Verstappen then. So he did, as you said, Jack, he did medium, and then on lap 39 pitted for the hards to finish off. I mean, throughout the race, the Red Bull appeared to be quicker than the Mercedes. It was unfortunate, I think, that because Perez at the start had some issues with electronics, which left him kind of starting from the pit lane, which was a little bit frustrating because I think that kind of influenced how teams were going to play their strategy a little bit. It meant that Mercedes could basically throw caution to the wind. Yeah, but yeah, exactly. As in, they could be like, "Oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this," because they weren't, all they were only having to worry about one car.
They knew they had 2 cars in the top 3. At the very least. They knew they had 2 cars in the top 3 at the very least.
Absolutely.
So in that scenario, they just went, well, we'll just load up our rifles with every round we got and fire every different strategy we can.
Yeah, so basically it turned into a bit of, you had Red Bull with a quicker car, and Mercedes just had to do a few things, clever things with strategy to try and put themselves in a good position, I guess.
Well, I do get the vibe that, I was sort of thinking about this earlier, was that possibly Mercedes, it looked like Red Bull went on the optimum strategy, but what Mercedes did was not hamper Hamilton, but put him in a scenario where they knew Verstappen at some point would catch up to him, but just make sure that they're ahead so that any sort of, whatever the sort of, let's say Hamilton did the whole race and nobody was in front or behind him contending with him, and instead if Verstappen did the same thing, you'd say that Verstappen probably would have won that race by about 10 seconds maybe. Yeah. And to mitigate that 10 seconds, I think what Mercedes did was just make sure that Hamilton was ahead so that it was slowing Verstappen down. Because as long as Verstappen can't overtake Hamilton, then he's not gaining those 10 seconds. He's losing that little bit of a lead every lap that he's behind Hamilton.
It's the kind of classic thing, isn't it? Murray Walker always used to say, it's one thing catching up to a car, it's another thing overtaking it, isn't it? I think basically the way I see it is that Mercedes put themselves in a position where in the last sort of 10 laps it was going to be, they were making it a shootout. I think if they hadn't done what they did in that race, it would have ended up being not necessarily comfortable for Red Bull, but I think you would have had Red Bull in front with Hamilton or Bottas at the start of the race, obviously. Either one of the Mercedes just kind of following behind as best they could. So, yeah, I mean, what were your thoughts on the strategies of both teams? Do you think that Mercedes did really well? Do you think Red Bull perhaps were a little bit conservative? What were your thoughts?
I think Red Bull went into there with a game plan, and they stuck to that game plan regardless of the scenario. But when, as we've seen in the past, the World Championships aren't won by the best car, they're won by the best driver and the best team, the best strategies. You can't just go into that Grand Prix thinking, we've got the best car, we'll go with the optimal strategy and ride it out, because things happen in the race which change the dynamics. And I think Red Bull were too stubborn on the weekend to go, Mercedes have pitted both of their cars before we have. Rather than just stick to our optimal strategy, we know we've got a better car than them. If we just match their strategy, we can't lose because we have the better car in a sense. Like when he came out the first time out of the pits, that's Verstappen now. When he came out the first time, I think he was about 5 seconds off Hamilton because of the time Hamilton had gained on fresher tyres, although they were not as quick tyres, so it meant Verstappen at some point would overtake, and then the process would repeat itself again for the final stint where Hamilton would pit early, Verstappen would pit later, but onto fresher tyres to catch up again. And it was kind of like, okay, great, you've stuck to your optimal strategy, which if you haven't got to overtake anybody during a race and there's no back markers and there's no safety cars, great, you've got the best strategy. But you see this in Grand Prix where things happen and you just go, you know what, we've got to be malleable. We've got to go, okay, we're going to pit now, we're going to get onto the hards, and we're just going to beat them as a car. Like, you can in a sense, like what Mercedes made this Grand Prix about was the entirety of the team, the entirety of the strategy. It was all the different dynamics going into it. What Red Bull did was say, we've got a better driver, and we've got a better car, and we're going to ignore strategy. And they should have just, I'm not going to say just copied Mercedes, because that's a bit passive if they think they've got a better strategy, but I don't think they should have been so stubborn to pit 4 laps. I mean, I think they were on their own. They were stragglers when they were the only ones pitting lap 17. Everybody else pitted and reacted to each other in lap 13, 14, because that was the done thing. It's like, you've got to react because you don't want to lose track position. And the same thing happened again. Verstappen pits on lap 39, completely on his own. It was like, okay, great, this may be your optimal strategy for an entire race if nothing happens, but things happen. I mean, you can even look at it from the point of, they were actually quite fortunate nothing happened, because from lap 39 onwards, from that point on, I think Verstappen came out of the pits roughly, I think he was 7.6 behind Hamilton at that stage, and he kind of just had to get to the end of the race, so he had to sort of close that 7.6 seconds gap and overtake in the, 20-ish laps that were remaining in that race. And they were quite fortunate there wasn't a safety car or something, because let's say a safety car comes in 5 laps' time, instantly everyone jumps onto the soft tyre because they can, or the medium tyre if it's that far out from the end of the race. But everyone's onto a new set, fresh tyres. Hamilton could have track position. If it was just a virtual, perhaps he's, the gap's just a lot shorter because it's a much quicker pit stop if everyone goes in like that. And it's like, from that point on, Red Bull could have been screwed in the sense of just going, we can't do anything because the way they set up their strategy doesn't help them in that scenario. I think they should have been more malleable. I think they should have adapted their strategy to sort of fend off against what Mercedes do, and that is how they probably could have won it. I mean, you saw it last year loads with Mercedes, where they'd have Bottas doing alternate strategies to Hamilton just to sort of cover off different eventualities to make sure one was always at the front, and that is the benefit of having 2 drivers at the front rather than just one. But
I mean, I think
obviously
in
this scenario is a bit awkward because Perez was so far down, but in all the same, Verstappen Red Bull should have changed their strategy to say, we're gonna cover off what Mercedes are trying to do a little bit more.
I mean, I do think it's worth noting as well that I think if it had been Bottas in the lead car with Mercedes, I think Verstappen would have won easily. I guess what I'm saying is, I feel like in this scenario, although Mercedes' strategy was really smart and they did a very good job to make those, they obviously knew that between the car and Lewis Hamilton they could make those tyres last. I think Hamilton basically pulled it out of the bag for Mercedes at the last, as in, I think you put the majority of drivers in that position and Verstappen wins. So I
Well, you say I guess I do think I agree with what you're saying. If it's Bottas, Verstappen wins, but if it's not Bottas, if it's somebody else in that car, like their second car, do you not think they might have actually had a better shot than Bottas?
I mean, it's worth considering that, Mercedes did botch his second pit stop, which cost him 10 seconds. And, in a race, that's as good as costing you the race, isn't it? As in, you're never going to make up... Yeah, unless somebody has a spin or there's a safety car, you're never making up 10 seconds. It just doesn't happen. Or unless you're driving the Mercedes from last year, in which case you probably could. I mean, Bottas is a tricky one because, we've discussed this many times. I guess from, Mercedes' perspective, as long as Bottas is in and around the top 3 every single race, then in terms of the team, what more can you ask? But as in, from a, how good is the driver perspective? They're probably going to possibly look at that perhaps at the end of the season. Who knows? I mean, there did seem to be a significant... I don't know whether perhaps I'm jumping down the notes now. I read the notes and I know we talk about... Well,
let's jump down. We'll come back to the turn 4 shenanigans in a minute. Let's jump down then to the other 2 drivers in a sense, because, I mean, I'd say Mercedes are actually quite lucky this weekend in that department, because Bottas, I mean, after 10 laps, he was 6 seconds off the lead. He never got within 5 seconds from then on. That's the entire race. And from lap 30 onwards, he was never closer than 15 seconds to the lead. So it's like, okay, it's all fair enough that he quite confidently got third off of making, Norris was about 20 off of him. But they were very fortunate Perez had all of the things happening to him, because if he hadn't, I mean, you're looking at it and you're going, there's going to be at least 2 Red Bulls in the top 3 most weekends.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Well, Mercedes' first priority is the constructors. That's what they care about the most. Secondary is getting the drivers' championship. So, how long can they be satisfied with these subpar performances?
And I mean, I guess this is what this is what's going to make it interesting. Is in purely by having somebody up there who's going to contest. It kind of puts Mercedes under the microscope a bit more than they have been in the past. Bottas generally is a bit of a slow starter in terms of races. In like we were saying this yesterday when we were talking about it, as in I don't know what it is with Bottas. Off the side, he always just seems to be swamped, like absolutely swamped. He has people like left of him, right of him.
Leclerc was on his back at one stage.
Yeah, exactly.
I think Norris had a pop. But then you look at the other side. Look at Perez. He battled from last, and he managed to get past everyone. And when he got to Leclerc, there wasn't any, am I going to get past? It was like, I'm past, done, next person. Perez looked like in a class of his own. I mean, he was voted driver of the day, and rightly so, from all of the shenanigans, but all of the stuff that happened to him at the beginning of the race, and it's like he overcame that. I mean, you'd never see Alex Albon do that. You'd see all that happen to him, and he'd finish 15th. He's just not the same calibre of driver.
Albon would do the reverse. Albon used to start 5th and then finish last. Whereas Perez starts last and finished 5th. As in, I think, and that was the real, not disappoint. That was the only thing yesterday. I was like, I would have quite liked to have seen that. I was to have seen, because as in at the end of the day, Perez did only qualify 11th. He had a poor qualifying, but you would have assumed that if he can get from basically last to 5th, he could get in contention of that top 3 position.
Absolutely. I mean, especially when you think of some of the other drivers that are in new teams, for that qualifying 2 session, which is the one which dictates what tyre you start on, that is if you make it into the top 10, Sainz started on the softs, Ricciardo started on the softs. And it's like, that was crucial because that meant they got into the final qualifying period, which meant that they're at least in the top 10. Perez, I don't know whether that was Red Bull or him making that decision, but he sort of went, I can get another 0.1 second, 10th of a second from these tyres. Didn't make it into Q3. He finished P11, started P11 rather, after qualifying. So it's like, maybe Red Bull will learn from this and go, okay, maybe we shouldn't take the gambles when we have a new driver in a new car.
Yeah, just get him in the top 10.
Yeah, get him into the top 10. But at the same time, there was nothing Perez could have done like, regardless if he'd qualified on pole, he had his car cut out on him during the formation lap. Very unfortunate. Meant that his tyres were rubbish then because they'd gone over something whilst he was off the track. So he has to go into the pit lane to start the race. After the first lap, he pits to get onto a new set of tyres, annoyingly for him. And then I think there was a safety car quite early on, which meant he at least caught up to the back. So he was fortunate in that regard, but yeah, never ideal for a Red Bull team that is looking at the constructors this year, to have a guy not even starting in the top 19 of drivers.
No. Yeah, it was a bit unfortunate for that one, really. For Perez, I mean.
Speaking of Bottas, though, what do you think is going to happen with his seat next year? Do you think he'll keep it, or do you think someone will take it? If so, who?
I mean, I honestly don't know, to be honest. It's a really tricky one because, like I've said, as long as Mercedes competed at the top, I don't think they'll be as disappointed. But it's whether they kind of look at it and go, actually, no, we feel that if we had somebody else in the car, we could be doing better. Equally, I think a lot of it will depend on what happens with Hamilton, because I think if Hamilton, decides that at the end of the year he's finishing, I don't think he will personally, because he seems to still be competing. But if that were the case, I think they'd probably be looking at it and going, well, we can perhaps mix it up a bit. Whereas at the moment, I think Mercedes would probably look at it and go like, if they were to get someone in, like, say, George Russell, as in George Russell is not just going to be as passive then, should we say, as Bottas.
No, that's true. I'll be honest, I'd look at it and think, if Hamilton beats Verstappen at the end of the year, I think he might go, you know what, that was a genuine challenge. I've beaten him. And he can almost go out on top. Very much like Nico Rosberg did to Hamilton, where it's like, he's beaten him once and he goes, I'm retiring. I'm not going to say that... Well, I feel like Rosberg did that more because I don't think he thought he could beat Hamilton again.
No.
But with Hamilton against Verstappen, I feel like that is a proper heavyweight battle. That's an Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury-esque battle.
Well,
and it's like whoever wins, it's like they got the one.
And I think there's an element of that as well. You know, if Hamilton wins this next title, there is literally... He's literally done everything that he could possibly do in the sport.
Yeah. But that's the thing. I think if he does beat Verstappen, I wouldn't be surprised if he retired, just because it's almost like he's got the 8, he's beaten Verstappen, he's proven he can do it, and he's done. And I think if Mercedes view it as, okay, that's a genuine possibility, I wouldn't be surprised if midway through the season they go, we're not happy having Bottas as our lead driver next year, and then having Russell come in. I wouldn't be surprised if they went, well, we're going to swap it halfway through the year and get Russell in, so that then if somebody is going to replace Hamilton, it's not going to be 2 new drivers. Because if they look at it and think, we're not keeping Bottas and we think Hamilton's going to retire, we may as well get one in halfway through the season to get them at least familiar with the car, so we've at least one good driver, and then work around the other one, regarding maybe one of the up-and-coming guys like Pierre Gasly, for example.
I mean, I don't think they... I would be surprised if they did it midway through the season, just because the only time I've ever seen a midway season change is Red Bull, and when that happened, it was very surprising.
It was surprising, but I think it would be good forward planning, because if they aren't going to keep Bottas and they think Hamilton's going to go, I don't think they want to go into a new season with 2 new drivers. Like, you see what's happening with Haas. Obviously, the Haas cars are dogs, so that's why that's happening. But I don't think if Mercedes want to be genuine constructors challengers every year, I think they need to do something which is a bit proactive. Unless they think Hamilton's going to stick around, and then great.
Well, I mean, the thing is that we say about Bottas, but as in, for a young driver like George Russell, having Bottas as your teammate isn't necessarily a bad thing. You know, Bottas, you know, this is the thing with Bottas. He's unfortunate because he's in the quickest car and he's competing against Lewis Hamilton. He doesn't win often. But then when you look at where he finishes, like the majority of the time, he is finishing in the top 3. So...
But that's the thing. But when we see the Perez performance of this weekend, you go any other weekend, I know exactly, it's like Bottas is no longer guaranteed to finish 3rd.
No.
They could be genuinely like, well, if he's not going to finish 3rd, what's the point in having him? Got to have someone who's at least finishing 3rd. But yeah,
it'll be interesting.
Should be a great battle between the two of them.
It will be. We'll discuss that going forward. But for now, I think we should discuss Turn 4.
Let's do that, because, I mean, it wouldn't be such an issue if people hadn't taken such an issue with it, sort of on social media and stuff, because there was a lot of, is this double standards? Because, I mean, for those who aren't aware, during the race, Hamilton exceeded the track limits at Turn 4 numerous times. And the FIA did say, okay, well, actually, we'll go back to the start. Through practice, people were exceeding the track limits at Turn 4, and they were sort of getting away with it, and the FIA wasn't really doing anything about it. Between practice and qualifying, they then said, okay, if you exceed track limits at anywhere, your lap time will be deleted. And if you exceed track limits and get a lasting advantage, you will be given a penalty. And when it went to the race then, a lot of people were exceeding track limits at Turn 4. One in particular was Lewis Hamilton.
But this is the thing, though. So this is where it gets confusing, because qualifying was if you exceed track limits, your time gets deleted. And then for the race, it was if you have a lasting advantage, So for some reason, they were like, this is the rule for qualifying. And then basically for the race, it was almost like a case-by-case. We'll decide whether you've gained an advantage or not. Which seems a little bit silly to me.
Well,
anyway, sorry, go on.
But to be fair, I think they would... Well, what they were doing then, Hamilton exceeded track limits at Turn 4 quite often. And eventually the FIA said, okay, you're not getting a lasting advantage, but you can't keep sort of exceeding the limits. We will give you a penalty if you keep doing it. So then Lewis sort of corrects himself and goes, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. He's staying on the track a little bit more. But those exceeding of the limits was sort of, I'm not going to say what was directly keeping him ahead of Verstappen for so long, but it could have played into that in some extent, that he was able to carry more speed into the next straight. So when Verstappen eventually catches up to Hamilton, he went off the track for I don't think he'd done it very often in the race. I think he did it after Red Bull were like, well, Lewis is getting away with it, we're going to do it.
They came on the radio, didn't they? They said, okay, Hamilton is drifting wide at turn 4. And I think they literally said the phrase, we'll start doing it, so we'll do it until we get told not to.
Yeah, exactly. Which is fair enough, because I think
of course,
nobody likes to be the team which is sort of getting hard done by. And in that scenario, Red Bull were like, well, we're trying to compete with Mercedes, which are already a very good team, with arguably an on-par car, but they're allowed to exceed track limits and we're playing by the rules. So it's like, well, if you're not going to do anything, we're going to break the rules as well, because you know what I mean? Anarchy raises anarchy. It's like instantly, as soon as one team gets away with something again and again and again and again, the other team's going to go, well, we're going to break a rule. We can go, well, we're just not going to turn at this. We're going to go straight on. Like, it doesn't work. So you've got to be stricter on the rules. But then when Verstappen eventually caught Hamilton, he overtook him at turn 4. He didn't get pushed off the track. But there was a lapped car which both Hamilton and Verstappen were overtaken. So the FIA said, oh no, that's a lasting advantage because you've overtaken Hamilton off the track and you get to give it back. And it's like, you know what I mean? Everyone can see how there's double standards because they haven't penalised Lewis for the entire race. But as soon as something goes the other way at the exact same point, it's like, got to give the position back. It's such a tough one to go down the line of.
It is a tough one. I mean, there are a couple of things I would say. I agree with you that, ultimately we'll never know how much of an advantage Hamilton gained by doing that. I think it was, as soon as Red Bull clocked onto it, they started doing it as well. So I think you could probably argue that, maybe not to the same extent as Hamilton, but Verstappen also gained an advantage doing it.
He did. But the thing is, I feel like he didn't start doing it till about the midway point through the race. Whilst I think Lewis was not getting away with it, but doing it a lot earlier on, which was where Red Bull were getting aggrieved.
But I think this is where the dilemma comes in, because if you're looking at it from the team's perspective, and I think this is one of the things about Formula 1 that makes it interesting, is that it is very much a case of get away with what you can get away with. And interpretation of rules. Now, if in qualifying they say, if you leave the track, your time will be deleted, that is very clear. Basically, what they're saying is, if you leave the track, that's wrong. We're not happy with that. As soon as they say, oh, well, it's only if you gain a lasting advantage, the Mercedes go, well, hang on, there you've said we're not allowed to do it. There you've said we can do it as long as we don't gain a lasting advantage.
And what is a lasting advantage?
Well, exactly.
It's
I guess this is where the thing comes in. What I'm saying is Mercedes haven't done anything wrong. It's that the rule is absolute load of nonsense.
Yeah, the FIA have really made a mistake on that rule.
Yes.
They should have been a lot more clear, a lot more strict, and just said something like, you exceed that 3 times, you will get a penalty. Nobody... Because I don't get why it should be a grey area. It's like... It's track limits for a reason. You exceed them, you are off the track. It's like you're breaking a rule. It's
there's no need for it. There's no need for it. Now, going back to the overtake. Now, on the Sky coverage, I think Paul di Resta said he spoke to Massey. I can't remember his official title, but he's like the guy who's responsible for race control, effectively. And his clarification about the overtake was, we made it very clear that if an overtake takes place outside of track limits, the space has to be given back. So I don't think that one wasn't because of clear advantage by exceeding track limits. I think it was literally just a case of, because he left the track and overtake Lewis Hamilton, he has to give it back. So I think you've basically, from what I understand, you've got to look at those two rules as separate. Even though they're both related to track limits, I think you've got to look at the one in terms of leading, and then this is where it's a grey area because you've got a right and wrong rule here where leave track overtake equals wrong, and then over here you've got leave track gaining in a slight advantage in that kind of grey area, which is why it's a little bit. I guess what I'm saying is what they did to Max Verstappen in terms of turn 4. And I'm not saying that Max Verstappen did it on purpose. He had nowhere else to go. The only other alternative would for him to have pulled out completely, at which point he loses so much time on Hamilton that it's not really fair.
Yeah.
But I think basically the ruling for Verstappen having to give the space back is 100% correct. Where it's wrong is that the FIA have made the vaguest, poorly worded rule relating to lasting advantage and all that kind of nonsense. So I guess it's kind of one of those what ifs. We'll never really know how much advantage did Lewis get, how did Verstappen get an advantage, probably not as much as Mercedes would have done. But yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one, to be honest. And I think going forward, you'd hope that there would be less of this kind of vague terminology used when, ruling about certain corners and stuff like that. And I guess this is a symptom of having a track like Bahrain. So, the next track is Imola. You're less likely to have these sort of scenarios because if you go wide on a corner at Imola, you're on grass. You're not getting an advantage there. So, who knows? Hopefully, we won't see this again.
Well, you could even use Monza, for example, because that back straight, when you enter the back straight, you go through quite a tricky chicane, not chicane.
Yes, yeah, and you can run wide.
But it's you can run wide and then carry on. It's if you exceed it there, they'll penalise you. There was no real reason for Massey to be so ambiguous rather, during the Bahrain Grand Prix with all these track limit rules. He should have just said, you exceed, you will get penalties.
Well, and the thing that confuses
it's clear
me
for
as
everyone,
well,
then, isn't it?
is that, and this isn't necessarily about clarity, but I don't understand why they take one stance for one session in qualifying and then take another stance for the race. That seems baffling to me. I don't really perhaps it's to encourage drivers to race on the limit a bit more, maybe, but that still seems a little bit a little bit bonkers. And I don't think it's a case of being strict. I just think they need to be clear. As in, I think if they said, don't exceed the track limits, drivers would be like, all right, if we're going to get penalised for it, we won't. But I think in some ways, in making one session one thing and then the race another, it almost clearly defined. It was almost like they said, you can't do it in qualifying. And then as soon as they eased it up for the race, it was almost like you had people thinking, oh, well, that means we can do it in the race.
Yeah.
It was really weird. Really bizarre.
A poor weekend for the rule makers of F1. But yeah. To be fair, though, that was a small thing in an otherwise perfect race. It was such a good weekend, and I don't think there was any other ambiguity about anything other than the track limit rule. And I guess anybody sees an opportunity to exploit, they'll exploit.
That's the thing, isn't it? I guess that's what I'm saying is, and I don't think Mercedes necessarily did anything wrong. I think that the problem falls with the terminology being very vague. But like we said, hopefully that'll be resolved. Certain tracks won't have that issue. So yeah, I guess we'll just see what happens with that. And in relation to that overtake, I don't know whether you've mentioned it in the notes. Now, obviously, when cars are not talking about turn 4 now, just the race in general, in relation to it, just happened. The overtake happened at turn 4. Now, as you said, Verstappen had been catching Hamilton at a rate of knots. Anyway, because he was on fresher tyres in what had been the quicker car over the course of the weekend. And then DRS on top. So heading towards turn 4, Verstappen gets the run on Hamilton. I think it was Giovinazzi, wasn't it, in the Alfa Romeo, who was the back marker. He pulled out the way as they have to. And then Hamilton kind of placed his car in a kind of clever position where he basically put his car between Giovinazzi and Verstappen, which made Verstappen, he had to run wide, didn't he? He had to go wide at turn 4. Not illegally, it wasn't like he shoved him off the track, but it was just one of those ones where Hamilton put his car in a position where it meant that Verstappen had nowhere else to go. I can't help but feel, and there's probably a huge element of hindsight in this, I'll admit, but I can't help but feel that if Verstappen has been a little bit more patient, and I appreciate that he was probably watching the laps tick down, and he was probably thinking, I've got to get past him somehow. If he had waited another few corners, he could have just pinged him on the next DRS zone.
I get what you mean. To be fair, the place where he overtook him was at the end of the DRS zone.
Yes.
So
yeah.
I feel like that was him making an opportunity.
It wasn't like a lunge, or it wasn't unreasonable for him to have done what he did. But I guess what I'm saying is that it was it's always going to be more difficult to overtake a car around a corner than it is on a straight. Mm-hmm. He'd managed to get past Hamilton, but not quite enough to kind of make it cleanly through the corner. Perhaps there's an element to which, he who knows, he could have pulled out a little bit, and then by the time the next DRS zone came around, he may not have been close enough.
Yeah,
I guess, again, that's one of those kind of
to be fair, the situation he did it there was, I think, the longest straight, or even the second, but the next DRS section was a DRS section, but it was a shorter straight. So to be fair though, his car was quicker through that section, so perhaps he could have had him on there. But
I guess I'm just saying that as a discussion point more than anything, just purely because he had the quicker car, and like I said, that's not necessarily, he's made a mistake or something like that, but perhaps in hindsight he could have waited a bit. But then a lot of them are saying, because obviously, so after Verstappen ran wide and went in front of Hamilton, he got the call, and they basically said you've got to let Hamilton through because of the infringement. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the people on the coverage were saying, oh, well, if he had waited until the next DRS zone, then he could have just stayed behind him and had DRS and just overtaken him straight away. I was like, there's another couple of corners before they get to the next DRS zone.
To be fair, Verstappen said it would be unfair to do it, which is pretty good. I mean, I don't know if he was genuinely thinking about fairness when he did it, but if going forward that is the logic, it would be. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, do the same.
What I'm saying is if the point I was making about, he could have waited to make the overtake is a little bit like hindsight. Mm-hmm. That one is massively hindsight, as in in that moment. And we were discussing this yesterday, weren't we? Mm. Surely in his head, Verstappen is going, right, I just need to let him past and then get straight back on him. As in, you've not got many laps left. You're sub 10 laps. So, that's another 2 or 3 corners, I guess, in his head, that he's thinking that's another 2 or 3 potential opportunities to kind of ping him, I guess. And it was just unfortunate the way it kind of unfolded, wasn't it? Because you assume that either by the fact that he'd run wide in turn 4, he'd lost either a bit of... we think he might have picked up some dirt, obviously, because it's off the track, or because he'd had to let Hamilton pass, he'd lost a bit of heat in the tyres, that by the time the next corner came, he had to correct himself, didn't he? Because he kind of oversteered and then had to slide, and from that point then, the tyres never seemed to quite have the grip.
From the point he gave it back to him, the position, from there on, I think we were messaging each other all the way through, and we thought, this is Verstappen's race to lose. This is Verstappen's race to lose. Just constantly, it's like he's on the better tyre, he's catching him at a rate of knots. But from the moment that Hamilton was allowed to have that position back, it did not look like Verstappen had any of the or the ability or the confidence or the car to overtake him again.
He had a few scruffy laps, didn't he?
Yeah, just couldn't find it.
And it could have been anything. It could have been the tyres, it could have been the loss of momentum. I think the tyres dropped off a little bit, and I guess I didn't know this, but they said on the maybe I don't know, but as in they said on the commentary, they said the thing with these tyres, I don't know whether this is the certain compound, whether it's the hard tyre compared to the medium and the soft, but they said that when you lose heat, it's very, very difficult to get the heat back very quickly. So it's almost like it could have taken him another couple of laps to get that heat back in his tyres, to get the grip to make the move, So it was a bit unfortunate the way it unfolded. But, we've just dissected that now over the course of, 10, 15 minutes. This all happened in seconds. Yeah. And it was exhilarating. It was like, what is going on?
It was an electric race.
It was immense, wasn't it?
The battle between Hamilton and Verstappen. I mean, the fact if every week it comes down to that smaller margin that people are dissecting a turn 4 off the track back onto the track situation,
and you're talking about like tyres dropping off and that. As in, like,
to that extent where it's 0.7 seconds separates first and second.
As in, like, let's not forget, Hungary last year, Hamilton was able to pit to go onto the soft tyre to go for fastest lap, and he went from first, came out and was still in first. Like, that's the sort of gap we had, and by the end of this race we were talking about 7/10. It was less than a second. Like, it's mental. It was really exhilarating. Do we want to say any more about the Red Bulls and the Mercs, or should we move on to the midfield?
I think we move on. I haven't got anything to say. Do you have anything to say?
No, I think I've had my say. I think we've both had our say about turn 4. So let's crack on with the midfield then. I thought it was a really good.
This is probably
really good battle.
This is the most number of constructors that are involved in a midfield battle that I've seen. It seems like everyone's having a bit of a bite of the cherry.
Yeah, I mean, like you know, obviously you had Perez in there, but we'll kind of almost exclude Perez because you'd assume that had he not had that issue, he would have been 3rd or 4th.
Yeah.
Depends on how things went. But yeah, McLaren were looking pretty tasty, I thought, particularly Lando Norris.
I mean, the pre-season hype about them having the Merc engine has definitely bared fruition. They very much look like the best of the rest, I thought. Did you think that?
I thought so, absolutely. And, you know, Ricciardo looked a little bit off the pace, but I
new
think
car, new team.
Exactly. I don't think it was so much that you were like flipping heck, Ricciardo's had a stinker. It was more a case of like, you think give it a couple of races or even a couple of weeks, because, you know, we got a 3-week gap now. Give Daniel Ricciardo a couple of weeks to get used to the car, used to the team, used to the setup, etc., etc. And you've got 2 McLarens up there, you know. So I think McLaren were looking really strong.
Yep.
So yeah.
What do you think of the Ferraris? Because, I mean, they are very much back in the competition. Like, from a year out where they looked like the 8th best team, which is very bad for them. I mean, on paper, they were the 5th best. No, 3rd. They were the 4th best team. This weekend,
I mean,
on paper.
It's funny because I was watching some of the coverage and they said in any other season, if you had, where did Leclerc finish 6th and Sainz 8th? In any other season, if you'd had Ferrari 6th and 8th, you would say they've had an absolutely terrible race. But after last season, 6th and 8th is very respectable, you know.
But not just on the basis of the last season, but on the basis of this season, in the sense of, I mean, you look at some of the other teams and how many teams are competing for such small amount of spaces.
Yeah, and Ferrari hadn't looked particularly quick in testing.
No.
You know, I guess
they look average.
So I think they'll be particularly happy with those positions. I mean, it was interesting what Sainz said after the race. He basically said something to the effect of he was kind of not taking it easy as in a relaxed sense, but just in a kind of cautious sense. You know, like they said, oh, well, that's interesting. He said, well, like, yeah, obviously, he's like, it's a new car, new team. Like he said, I don't feel comfortable yet pushing that car to its limit. Like, I haven't got a 100% feel for the car yet, which I guess from Ferrari's perspective is promising because they kind of sat there like, well, on paper that means he can go quicker.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I
mean, you look at the finishing times. It's like Lando was 46 off the lead, Perez was 52 off the lead, Leclerc was 59, and then it was Ricciardo 106, Sainz 107, and there's a 125 is Tsunoda, the next person. So he is very much, there's a clear and defined gap between Sainz and then the next best person. So if this sort of Norris, Perez, Leclerc, Ricciardo, Sainz, basically just Ferrari and McLaren, if it does look like it is just those two teams battling for 5th, 6th, 7th and 8th. And Sainz is very much keeping up with Ricciardo, who you look at it on paper, Ricciardo's in a McLaren team with a Mercedes engine, and Sainz is in a Ferrari team which is trying to muster some kudos back. And it's like, and the fact that he was only a second off Danny Rick, even they're both in new cars, So they both had no more or less excuse than the other. So
No.
it's a very good performance by Sainz, yeah.
Yeah, it's respectable, very respectable. So yeah, and I mean, I think what Sainz said there is quite interesting. It'd be interesting to see if Daniel Ricciardo had a similar take on McLaren, or whether he was just saying send it all the time like he usually does. But yeah, it's in that you could almost split the midfield in half, couldn't you? Really, I say in half. You've basically got McLaren and Ferrari, and then kind of the rest are kind of mashed around a little bit.
Yeah. To be fair, I would like to put AlphaTauri, strangely enough, in with McLaren and Ferrari. I think they were very unfortunate this weekend. Yuki Tsunoda looks like the next best thing to come into Formula One.
Yeah, he was looking sharp.
He looked fearless going into some of these turns, and he was
and
instantly annoyed at anything that went wrong, and I think that's the winning mentality. You saw it in practice. If it was either practice or qualifying, I think it was practice. But it was
didn't he?
Yeah, he came out in traffic and he was like, "What's going on? Like, sort it out." It was like you don't have that sort of confidence as a new driver usually, and he just came and went, "Yeah, we should be sorting this sort of stuff out."
It's not. It's confidence, not arrogance, that I think is quite nice. It's not a kind of, oh, I'm better than everyone else. It's a kind of, no, I know my own ability, like, and again, like they said, he's the first, I can't remember, they said something along the lines of like the first person to get points on a debut race. I can't remember what the stat was, so like it was very impressive.
But then on the other side of things, though, on the other side of his garage, is Pierre Gasly, who had arguably the worst luck of the weekend. He qualified 5th. Now, he qualified 5th. I was just amazed. I was literally flabbergasted when he qualified 5th. I was thinking, wow. AlphaTauri last year were probably, I can't remember what position they finished, but it's probably 7th, maybe 6th, 7th, somewhere around that. And you wouldn't really consider them a team that's aiming for a sort of top 8 finish every week. But you look at what's happened so far this season, they very much probably going in with a lot of confidence into the next race. And, Gasly had it was the slightest of touches onto the back of Danny Rick's car, and his front wing just went, nope, obliterated itself under the carpet. Gone. Yeah, it was useless. It was like, oh my goodness, how unlucky can he get? So he goes right to the back, but the unfortunate thing for him was there was no safety car. So he was then 25 seconds behind Mick Schumacher. And it was like, that was kind of his race, because no more safety cars came out. He caught up. I think he finished 17th in the end, but it was never going to be a fruitful situation from there. Gets no DRS. There was just nothing going right for him in a sense. But going into the next race, I genuinely think AlphaTauri are in with a shot of finishing in that sort of McLaren Ferrari remit.
Yeah, I mean, there's a part of me, I don't know whether perhaps it's because I overestimated the impact of having the Merc engine, but there's a part of me that would have hoped that McLaren were a bit closer to Red Bull and Merc.
Yeah. Like Lando was having a great weekend, and Bottas pitted for a new set of softs just to get fastest lap, and he still finished about 10, 15 seconds ahead of him.
Exactly. I mean,
there's still a gulf.
There's still a bit of a gap, but who knows? This is the last year of this set of regulations. Come next season, perhaps McLaren can fight their way back up there. But I guess for McLaren and Ferrari, they'll be delighted, I think, with how that weekend has gone. As you said, AlphaTauri promising but unfortunate. And I think AlphaTauri will be delighted with how Yuki Tsunoda has kind of just dropped in and just got on with his business, really. And Gasly is an excellent driver not to be sniffed at. There's a lot of positives for AlphaTauri there this weekend. On the flip side, you've got Alpine and Aston Martin.
Oh, I mean, talk about two teams that go into a season with a lot of optimism. They got a new branding for both teams, new sponsors in a sense. And a
four-time world champion, joining Aston Martin, a two-time world champion rejoining the sport with Alpine.
Yeah, and it's what an absolutely awful weekend for those two teams.
Yeah, they did not have a good time today. Not
Shocking. Well, starting with Aston Martin.
at all. Mm.
They've sort of been walking around like they've been really done over by the FIA with these new regulations because it's really hurting their low rake car. It is low rake, isn't it? I'm getting that right.
Yeah, so basically, if you look at when they say rake, it's like the angle that the floor is at.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at the AlphaTauri, they have got like crazy. I think I'm right in saying that. I think that's what high rake is. Let me have a look.
Yeah, I think it is. So the rear end of the car is enormously high off the ground, and the front is. I think it stays the same, the front, but it's sort of that elevation. What sort of angle you're looking at is depending on if you're a high or a low rake car.
Yeah, so basically, Mercedes would be classed as low rake. So yeah, AlphaTauri and basically, if you look at AlphaTauri, they're the perfect example of high rake. And then if you look at what Mercedes used to be and what Aston Martin, formerly Racing Point, used to be, they would be low rake.
And this is where the issues lie, is that last season, Aston Martin, or rather Racing Point, pulled a blinder. They basically bought the Mercedes car, which won the World Championship the year before. Great. That is an enormously good platform to start a season from, because you've already got the best car. But that's not a sustainable model. They can't then this year go, we want to buy the Mercedes car that won the Grand Prix the year before. It's not sustainable. You can't just buy a whole car every year. It just doesn't work. So when you get to these situations where regulations change, Mercedes adapted and they're still in the top three. Arguably they haven't got the best car, but they've got at least the second best. And they're still a gulf off of everybody else.
And you've got to consider as well that they've had DAS taken off them, so it's not just...
So it's a double whammy for Mercedes.
Yeah, so it's not just a kind of regulation change, as in they've had part of their car has been affected by the regulation change in the rake, yes, but then they've also had a piece of technology that is arguably very effective also taken off them. And like you said, Racing Point, for me, what Racing Point did last year was very borderline in legality, but from their perspective, what you would have hoped is that they would have merely used that as a springboard to kind of kick on, whereas it seems like that just hasn't really happened as yet.
Because if you're not the one designing your car, and if you don't really know what the whole ideas behind it were, in a sense, because you're just buying it from someone else, then you can't adapt. And this Aston Martin car, great, it was a great car last year, but... this year, they can't adapt to the regulations because they don't know how any of it really works. So they're just like, oh, our car doesn't work now. It's like, oh, okay.
I mean, again, it doesn't help that they had one of their drivers starting from the back of the grid, in Vettel. He was starting from the back of the grid because of not slowing down for yellows, I think, wasn't it, in Q1?
But at the same time, he qualified 18th. So it's like, he's at the back regardless. And
then he rear-ended Ocon.
Yeah,
again,
and blamed Ocon. It was a poor weekend for them, and you got to look at it though, and they've got to be really looking like they've got egg on their face, because you see Sergio Perez and you see him battle from the back all the way up to 5th, obviously with the best car, but he's managed to do that, and they've just signed 4-time world champion Sebastian Vettel, who had a pretty bad weekend. It was like, I don't know why they were so stubborn on, hey, let's just try a one stop, and at all costs they'll try the one stop because they can't think about beating anybody on race pace. And it seemed so defeatist when you see all of the other teams. I mean, you look at Yuki Tsunoda, he qualified 13th and he made it all up to 9th on race pace. If you trust in your driver and your car, you can gain those positions. You haven't got to go with an insane strategy like a one stopper when everybody... Some teams doing 3 stoppers on the weekend. And it's like, you can't quite understand what they were thinking this weekend, but surely it's back to the drawing board and going, hey, let's just play it sensible. Get the points we can.
I mean, it was a tricky one, wasn't it? Because as soon as Vettel was... I mean, I'll be honest with you, I didn't really follow Lance Stroll. Not a lot happened with him, I don't think.
No. He finished, I think he started like 9th and then finished 10th. He was just sort of battling with a load of, middle of the tier drivers.
Not necessarily that he had a bad race, but he had a quiet race, let's put it that way. But with Vettel, they kind of kept him out as long as possible on the mediums, and you were kind of watching it and going, well, right now, okay, you're keeping him out longer, but he's just hemorrhaging time and position. As in, there was that one point, wasn't there, where I think it was Carlos Sainz, Vettel, and Alonso were having a little battle, and I think Alonso managed to get in front, and then Sainz took them both.
Yeah,
so like Vettel was just like dropping down the table like a stone, and then they eventually pitted him. But I mean,
Alonso was no better with fresh tyres, pretty much.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess the writing was on the wall for them as soon as Vettel was relegated to last, wasn't it, for this weekend? Yeah. But I guess the disappointing thing for Aston Martin, they don't seem to have the pace they were kind of hoping for. Basically, Aston Martin have been replaced by Ferrari in the running order after that race.
But not just replaced, substituted, swapped pretty much, because they haven't in a sense just moved down one and Ferrari sort of jumped ahead of them. They've pretty much gone from 5th best team or 4th best team all the way down to about 7th or 8th. They look a shell of themselves. I mean, we did mention about the writing being on the wall for Vettel, but you think about last season, Perez won the Bahrain Grand Prix from last in Racing Points too. It's like they just really don't look like they are the same team as last year. I mean, even the Alfa Romeos finished ahead of Vettel. I know obviously Vettel was at the back, but if the Alfa Romeos are able to finish 11th, 12th, and split the two Aston Martin drivers and finish above both the Alpine drivers, it's like, well, that's what happens when you just develop a car and you adapt with the rules. It's like they really have some work to do. Yeah, and I mean, moving on to Vettel briefly, and we discussed this, didn't we? Because for a little while when, obviously last season with Vettel is kind of a write-off with Ferrari, wasn't it? Because they basically not gave up in an unprofessional sense, but Vettel was just kind of coasting, and he was kind of like, well, I'm not here next year, and it's all gone a bit sour. Yeah. You had Ferrari, who clearly put all their eggs in one basket with Charles Leclerc. But before that, Vettel, there were a few times where Vettel did things where, you look at it and you go, that's not something that a 4-time world champion really does. As in, I think it was at Silverstone where he was following Max Verstappen, he mistimed the braking and just ploughed into the back of him. There was, I don't know whether these were in the same season, but I just remember them. There was the German Grand Prix at Hockenheim. He was leading the race, it got a bit wet, and then he just slid off the road at 30 miles an hour and just planted it into a wall. Yeah. As in, like, not necessarily horrendous, like, well, I say that, as in, the sort of things you look at and go, that's not really the sign of a 4-time world champion. There was an element to which last season perhaps you looked at it and went, is it a case that there's a bit of Ferrari, there's problems with the team Ferrari, not necessarily in terms of the car, but in terms of, like strategy and things like that, where you go, is it all Sebastian Vettel? Is there an element to which they're relying so much on Vettel that he's having to do like everything himself? And I think there is and I feel sorry for Vettel, I really do. I think there's the danger that now at Aston Martin, if things don't quite work out, people could turn around and point the finger and say, well, it wasn't the car, it was the driver, and that would be unjust, I think, as in, I think Vettel has been very hard done by in the past couple of years. Especially when you look at his teammates. None of his teammates are ever finishing really high up. So, in these years that he's been not at his best. Stroll finished 9th. Finished quite a distance off of the good pack of cars. And last year, Leclerc, of course, he had 1 or 2 sensational drives where he finished 2nd and 3rd, I think, or something like that. But it was like, bulk of the time they are both finishing outside the top 10.
Yeah, and there were also a few times, where Leclerc made, as in you think of the Austrian Grand Prix last year, ploughed into the side. Yeah, he like drove into the side of Vettel. He had another one, Bahrain last year, where he completely misjudged it, and I think it was Stroll, Leclerc, and Verstappen all ended up out of the race because of the one incident. So, yeah, it's not just a driver thing, but I think there's a danger that if it doesn't pick up soon, I think the fingers could start pointing again, which would be a shame. But we'll move on to Alpine then. Add a bit of a. Well, I mean, the first things first is that Fernando Alonso retired, which is very disappointing.
From the
Good
race.
to see him back, though.
Not from the season again.
Sorry?
From the race he retired. He hasn't retired from the season yet.
No, retired from not from the sport. He's back properly, but as in, it was good to see Fernando Alonso back, and as in,
it was.
like they were talking about it before the race, and they were like 10 of the 22 drivers have got a race win. You know, it's crazy. There's an awful lot of talent in the field this year.
And it just seems Alpine don't have any of it from a car perspective.
Brutal, absolutely brutal. But no, like they said, when
they
Carlos
look like
Sainz made that manoeuvre, they said like Carlos Sainz has overtaken like 6 champions worth of titles there.
Yeah,
as in like
4
2 for Alonso. But yeah, sorry, go on. What were you saying?
Nothing really in particular. It was just the fact that Alpine was so rubbish.
Yeah,
they just had nothing. What's his name? Alonso retired, as you say, and Ocon finished behind pretty much everybody but the Haas and the Williams, and the AlphaTauri Pierre Gasly car, which was 25 seconds behind everybody at one stage. It's like, good gracious, it's like not even, there's no promising signs from the driver in terms of Ocon or from the car that it can't finish a race with both, and B didn't even get close to finishing the top 10.
Well, I mean, like, when you look at Mercedes, they've been complaining that their car is twitchy, like especially in the wind, which Bahrain tends to have a lot of. But at least you kind of look at it and go, all right, well, it is, but they've got a cracking power unit. Okay, it may not necessarily be the best this year, but it's right up there. Whereas Alpine's car, as in the Renault power unit, looks as Renault as it possibly could, just kind of meh. And like Alonso was like wrestling the car like all the time before he retired.
Was not a good weekend.
And I tell you what's fascinating, because I this has just popped into my head now because I've been watching Drive to Survive today, like I said, and I've just watched the episode in relation to Danny, Rick and Renault, and you kind of look at it and you go, he's pulled off a masterstroke moving to McLaren this season.
Yeah,
he really,
especially
really
as
has.
McLaren have moved, because they had the Renault engine, didn't they, last year?
Yeah.
And they've gone from that to Mercedes, and I think he saw right at that moment, he went, I want to be in that car for sure. And I think that's kind of what McLaren were thinking. It's like, we go from this engine to that engine, everybody's going to want to drive for us. And they do. And Ricciardo's there. I mean, they've arguably got the best lineup of 2 drivers.
McLaren, I would say one of the best, definitely.
Yeah, maybe behind Red Bull, because they got Verstappen and Perez. I mean, and then maybe, it depends how much you rate Bottas, but you could arguably say better than Merc if somebody says Norris is better than Bottas, somebody would have to say Norris is better than Bottas, which is tough. But you've also got to say he's so much better than Bottas that the difference between Ricciardo and Hamilton is such that McLaren is better. But certainly top 3 for driver partnerships this year. So, absolute masterstroke.
I mean, my prediction didn't quite come to fruition that Ricciardo would get on the podium, but I wasn't far off, because McLaren got 4th. Yeah. All it would have taken was a retirement from Bottas, and I wouldn't have been that wrong, just a little bit wrong.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You're kind of something like, all right, whatever. Alpine not really doing much. To be honest with you, I can't say I'm really surprised. It's what I kind of expect. But again, they've got Alonso. Okay, he's very talented. He has been driving, but he's been out of the sport for 2 years. He's probably still kind of, as much as a 2-time world champion can be, he's probably still feeling his way back into the sport, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't exactly been out of. Well, he's been out of this sport, but he's still been driving. He's been doing all these other sort of event things.
I guess
but
we're saying about Ricciardo and Carlos Sainz having a bit of time to adjust. They were in the sport last year. It's just a case they were in a different car. Fernando Alonso has not been in the sport. Excuse me a second, I dropped my pen. Fernando Alonso has not been in the sport. It's one of those things where it's like, you've perhaps got to give them a little bit of leeway. They've also got a new team boss, who I don't actually know the name of.
No, I was thinking then. It's always been Cyril Abiteboul.
I know, what a guy. Let me have a look. Renault. Oh, that's awkward. Alpine.
F1. No Renault anymore, we got Alpine.
boss of team principal. It is Laurent Rossi. There we go. Yeah. So him. They've got that guy in charge. Don't know who he is. Never heard of him, to be honest.
What's his name?
Laurent Rossi.
Fair.
So yeah, there's a bit of change at Alpine, perhaps over the course of the season. These sort of things will balance themselves out. And look, let's not forget at the start of last season, how many cars did we have retire in that first race? It was bonkers.
A lot. Well, yeah, because Latifi finished 11th. And I remember that because I thought Latifi almost scored a point. Yeah. How on earth has Nicholas Latifi almost scored a point in a Formula 1 race? So it's a blessing that we only had 3 retirements this year.
Yeah. So, a lot can happen. Should we move on to the kind of...
supposed back markers.
The supposed back markers, yes.
And I'm going to make the claim here now. I've put it a little bit into our notes, but in regard to Alfa Romeo, as much as they are considered back markers, and I think they always will be for the remainder of this season.
Well, probably on their resources and stuff like that as well.
I do have this sort of feeling that they are going to finish ahead of either Alpine or Aston Martin by the end of the season. They were the model of consistency. The only time they had any retirements from a session was when the drivers crashed the cars. So that was Raikkonen crashed, I think, twice during the weekend. But apart from that, model of consistency, no engine or car failures, and they ended up finishing 11th and 12th. Obviously, it doesn't come with any points, so that's going to be frustrating for them. But, I mean, you look at it and you go, they've had a good weekend.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think saying that they'll finish ahead of Alpine or Aston Martin is very bold. I mean,
bold, but I think it's true.
If that's right. But, I mean, what I would say is I feel like if you're looking at, if you're classing Alfa Romeo, Williams and Haas as the back markers, you've got the midfield, bit of a gap, Alfa Romeo, bit of a gap, Williams and Haas.
Yeah.
I'd
even say Williams, bit of a gap, Haas. Haas just looked like the absolute dog. They're the dog of the year at the moment. But
yeah, I mean, you get what I mean. There's a bit of a gap between Alfa Romeo and the other two teams.
Yeah, they've very much clawed their way up a little bit away from them. Bit of breathing.
But as in, I guess when you're comparing, as in Williams are in their worst, coming off the back of last season, absolutely terrible season. This year is very much a rebuilding season for them. New ownership, regulation season 1 year away. Regulation change 1 season away. So I think
George Russell looked good though.
He did look good. I mean, to be fair to George Russell, the majority of the time he looks good. He out-qualified Latifi once again. No surprises there. Had a pretty good weekend. 14th. Yeah. Yeah, as in it's not a horrendous weekend for Williams. I mean,
he doesn't do anything wrong. That was sort of the key thing.
I mean, I guess for Williams, I feel like they've, like last season, they were absolutely rock bottom.
Yeah.
Perhaps there's a case that they've kind of dragged themselves from that position and Haas have willingly taken that role on themselves.
Yeah. Haas have sort of taken it like, we kind of want to be last. We want to be last because we're going to save up everything and go properly the year after, which seems so defeatist.
Yeah.
I'd much rather see Haas go out there with, I don't know, Fiat 500 and just do that every week and go, we'll just save all our money as well, because they literally, there's no point in them putting out a car every week.
No.
Unless they plan on retiring it early, like Mazza Spin, as we've been saying, every week, and just have him spin out right at the beginning, save them a load of money. Great, but they're not... I mean, it's almost a joke with them being in it at the moment. They're just not doing anything. They're not trying, and they won't be trying, so it's like, let them just save the money. That's the thing, isn't it?
Even when Williams were in the doldrums last year, you never got the impression that it was for a lack of trying, whereas with Haas, it does very much feel like they've gone, we're just going to save our tokens, we're just going to get through this year, and then next year we'll be back better. And you're just kind of
Williams got Paddy Lowe, is that right? Is that the guy's name? The one who does, they got Paddy Lowe. They try different things, and it doesn't work, and it's like, well, okay, they're just in a rut. But Haas are going we're going to tank on purpose. It's like,
then, do you think that, we're going into a bit of a wider discussion here, but do you think that's perhaps because of the nature of Formula 1, Haas, as in Haas don't have the resources of the bigger teams. They've kind of got to look at their opportunities and realistically go, well, next year's our best chance to actually do okay and be competitive.
Yeah, I guess it is a bit of consolidation in the sense of just going, well, we know we'll be bad this year, but next year we hope to be a mid-table team.
I mean, look, don't get me wrong, that doesn't make it good for Formula 1 fans this year. And
like,
in general, that's not the sort of thing you want to be seeing. But from a bit, as in, there is the kind of business side of Formula 1 and the financial side as well that we don't always know about, I guess.
What's a shame is that they have to put out a car and they have to compete this year, because if they don't, you remember when they joined and they have to have, I think it's either a 2 or 3 season period where they don't really get any money from the F1.
Yeah.
Because they don't just let teams join and
they'd have to go through that again.
Yeah, and it's like, but I'd much rather the F1 go, you know what, it's not worth seeing you blight the screen at the bottom of the leaderboard every week because they're not even doing anything.
It's not worth you being here. Wow.
Yeah, it's like, just save your money and be better next year, and we will let you keep that money. But yeah, just doldrums.
Yeah, there was no real positive. And didn't Schumacher spin as well?
Yeah, he span with...
Sorry, we haven't really said. Mazepin span and smashed into a wall, which caused a safety car. So he was out after 3 corners of his Formula 1 debut.
Yeah, and I didn't even mind. I mean, I was watching videos of him in F2 this weekend, and he's just a dangerous driver. You do not want him on the track. He just pushes people off into really dangerous things. It's like... He's not safe. He's just not safe. I
feel like there's some off-the-track things going on with Mazepin as well, which don't help matters. We won't go into that.
No, but just... Yeah, I'm not even disappointed to see him crash out early, because it's just another car that needs to get lapped at the end of the day. But Schumacher finished almost a second quicker than him in qualifying. That is the difference between what is a promising driver. Some would say Schumacher's in the sport because of his dad's name, a little bit, but he did win F2, so there is some sort of accreditation there. But Mazepin never finished in the top 6 for the F2, so it's like
really,
he never finished in the top 6, and he was able to buy his way in. I mean, even Latifi finished close to the top. But Mazepin's not even finished top 6. And it's like, this is where you're seeing the extremes of how much you can just pay for a seat. Because he is not anywhere near the finished article for what a Formula 1 driver should be.
Well, yeah, and you look
if anything, he makes Stroll look good. It's like, everyone's always sort of had that thing on Stroll, like, oh, he's paid for a seat. But it's like, he's as we were saying last week, he's qualified on pole. He's been on the podium. Has he been on there twice now, the podiums?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and it's like...
I can't remember.
He's got some racing calibre about him.
The thing is that you can pay your way into a seat, but if you're not good enough, you'll get found out.
Yeah,
it's as simple as that. As in, like, look, don't get me wrong, I was one of the ones who kind of levelled that criticism a little bit at Lance Stroll, but I think he has very much proved that he is worthy of a seat in Formula 1.
Yeah, of a seat. I don't know if he's worthy... Well... Yeah, it's always a struggle to say somebody's worthy of what that seat was worth last year, because that was a genuinely good car, and there were some genuinely good drivers in worse cars. Yeah, but then again,
Jack, let's not forget now, this weekend, Sebastian Vettel finished at the bottom, pretty much. Yeah. Lance Stroll finished 10th in the same car. Yeah. Sebastian Vettel's a 4-time world champion, and he's no mug. But, like you say, is in... And the thing is as well, it's not like there isn't any talent in F2s, and you've got like Guan Yu Zhou, who's excellent. You've got Callum Ilott, who's also very talented.
Tictum as well. He had a good weekend.
Yeah, there are a lot of good drivers in Formula 2. You're probably looking at and going, surely they'd be worth more of a punt than Mazepin. But there we are. That's how it works. And like you said, they'll possibly be people who argue that Mick Schumacher has got there because of his name, and maybe that helped him throughout his career. But ultimately, you don't win Formula 2 if you're not a good driver.
No,
you don't. Over the course of a season, you don't maintain a seat in Formula 1 if you're not good enough. As in, it's not that kind of sport. It really isn't. So, I guess we'll have to see what happens. But Haas just need to do something. rather than just
nothing.
I feel at the moment they're just present. Haas exist. That's all we can really say about Haas at the moment.
It wouldn't even surprise me if they went full shameless at the end of the season and just retired a car with no issues, just because it's like, well, we put a car out, we qualify for the criteria to get our money for next year. It's like, oh, okay. But yeah, tough one. Should we have a look ahead of what's happening? Well, what sort of the outlook is going from this weekend?
I think so. I mean, look, the next race is 3 weeks away, which I think is huge.
Don't quite... Well, it was meant to be the Chinese Grand Prix at some point in these 3 weeks, and it got cancelled, and Formula 1 just went, we're not going to schedule something else. And it does seem a little bit like, so all of these teams who were quote-unquote sandbagging their cars during testing to not give away how much pace they had, it's like, that was only 2 weeks ago. So teams were hiding their speed 2 weeks ago to make sure that people weren't prepared for this weekend. So they got 3 weeks after this weekend. It's like, well, whatever sandbagging they were doing then, it's not going to really matter anymore.
And this is what, just going off from that briefly, this is why I think, not necessarily worried, but I think Red Bull will be really frustrated that they didn't come away with a win. Because you can only assume...
Mercedes time, they're going to work it out.
Exactly. You can only assume that the more time you give Mercedes, the more competitive their car is going to be. So I think they'll be a bit frustrated. Anyway, that's by the by. As in, it gives the teams an opportunity to perhaps consolidate themselves a little bit. Drivers like Carlos Sainz, Ricciardo have moved to new teams. The younger drivers, or newer drivers, I should say, like Tsunoda, Schumacher. I mean, I guess you could probably include Mazepin, but there doesn't seem to be much hope for him right now. No. So we'll see how that goes. Like you said, I don't understand why they didn't just even 2 weeks, just move because it's Imola next, isn't it?
Yes.
That'd
be an interesting one. That's going to be very similar to Monaco, I think, in the sense of it's such a narrow track.
It's difficult to overtake it. I think pole could be king there, to be honest. Which you'd have to assume would probably favour Red Bull as the cars stand at the moment. But
yes.
One of the big talking points was the weekend was the wind and the kind of gusty conditions on track seem to hinder, I wouldn't say favour Red Bull, they seem to hinder Mercedes more than they hinder Red Bull. If you take that away, is the Mercedes as far behind as this weekend would suggest? Maybe not. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But like you said, it's a difficult track to overtake at Imola.
And to be fair, Mercedes did seem to have the edge on the straights. Not massively, but the areas where Red Bull were sort of making that advantage were the sort of
sections.
Yeah, the windier, where there's more bends and all that. That was like sector 2 basically. The other sectors, they seem pretty on par.
It was parity, wasn't it? So
yeah, and Bahrain is one of those circuits where there's way more straights than anywhere else. Really, there's not apart from Monza where it's all straight. Apart from that, it's like most. I mean, particularly if you look at circuits like the Spanish one, that's just Hungary. That's pretty much all bends for the entire race. So you'd assume Red Bull are really gonna take it to Mercedes this year. I mean, this could be one which got away from them, but it very much also could look at it from the counter and say this is one of the few that Mercedes had to win and they really struggled to win. Yeah,
I mean, I guess we'll just have to see what happens, won't we? As in, how much of an impact was that wind having? How much, how to what extent can Mercedes close that gap in the next couple of weeks? As in, you had Bottas saying the car was undrivable, yet he finished third. That doesn't really seem undrivable to me. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, it's exciting. As in, there's a lot of things going on. I'm a big fan of Imola. Not the easiest to overtake, but as in, it's a fast kind of sweep-in circuit. So
there's no hairpins on it at all. It's just consistently fast everywhere. Everything leads into the next one.
So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Really, to be honest. Looking beyond that, we've said about the wind, how much of an impact is that going to make throughout the season if Mercedes seem to be a little bit more unstable in those conditions? Moving on from there, is that going to be a long-term issue for them? You mentioned last season they had problems with tyres, didn't they? And the Mercedes just absolutely shredded its tyres on most circuits.
Yeah, especially if they're going to have to literally pit that early on. Well, the fact that they can't even push on certain tyres in certain conditions because they just haven't got the life on them with the car which they've got. It really, it's not a positive outlook for the remainder of the season. Like I wouldn't have said Bahrain was a circuit which, I mean, maybe the heat plays quite a lot, but it's a very straight line circuit. There's not very many technical sections where you really got to get some grip out of those tyres to get going. So when you get onto these faster circuit, well, not faster rather, more technical circuits, Mercedes should, in theory, be struggling even more. So this season could very well go Red Bull's way.
Some would say it could go down to the wire.
Down to the wire, just like the final episode of Drive to Survive went down to the wire, such as the name of the episode.
Such as the name is this podcast. No, I'm joking.
Yeah. Thanks for the shoutcast. Shout out.
Yeah, I know. We didn't give them permission to use our podcast
we didn't,
title in their episode. You know, we'll forgive you, go Netflix. Just next time, let us know, please, if that's all right. We'd appreciate it. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else to talk about apart from that, really, is there?
Good weekend. Lots going on. Hopefully in 3 weeks' time it's just as good. Yeah,
I mean, if it's anywhere close to that, I'll be happy, to be honest. As a Formula 1 fan, I don't think we can... it would be high expectations to expect that level of racing and that amount of stuff happening in a race every week. But if we can get somewhere close, that would be pretty good.
Absolutely. So
there we are. Right. That's the end of the podcast for this week. Thank you all for listening. If you're listening on YouTube, why not subscribe for some more Formula 1 discussions over the next 23 races. 22 races. 23 in total. We've had one. So why not subscribe? Perhaps leave a comment. Let us know your thoughts. If you're listening on Spotify, why not give us a follow? As always, we are on Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Pocket Casts, and I think that is...
Yeah, I think that's all of them. Yeah.
I think that's all of them. But yeah, Jack, pleasure as always, and we'll be back again next week to update you with all of the latest and greatest. See you soon.